Hey guys, K-Taros here with another video. This time I'll be doing a comparison between the Deluxe Steno Belt and K-Taros with the newly released CSM versions. Now this video is not to try to figure out which one is better, because obviously that is the CSM version, but rather this is to give a point of reference to just how much the CSM versions have improved upon the originals. And I did a bit of a general overview of the differences between the two in my review, but this will be more in depth and go into not just the designs but also the light and sound differences. So let's get started. To start, we'll look at the two Deno belts. So the first thing we'll look at is the designs. Generally they are the same, but obviously there really isn't anything that's shared between the two in terms of the actual molding and sculpting it, as this was designed from scratch to be more similar to what's seen on the show, rather than this one, which is the original toy that was sold back in 2007. You can see it is a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, uses some different shades of paint, especially for the arrow on the side, as well as the colors of the buttons, which are also bigger. One thing I did highlight in my original review is that for the front cover, on the original, the whole thing was done up in chrome, though for mine, the chrome came off, so I had to paint in these parts with silver, whereas it's all completely silver on the new version. Additionally, while this was plastic, the new rim here is die-cast metal. You can see that, again, some other parts that have been enlarged are this section right here, which is where the K-Taros will clip in, as well as a actually kind of streamlined design for the clips, so that the buttons used to release them don't stick out as much. The belt design is a pretty standard belt design or comparison between a deluxe and CSM version. As for deluxe belts, they always use a standard plastic belt that's simply unpainted, whereas for CSM belt it's a bit more of a complex layered system where it's this nylon material or this soft plastic rubbery material that is put over cloth straps that are adjustable. Interestingly, there are some details that are different between these designs. As you can see, while both of them have the design of a stripe going down them, there are also these indentations along the old version. They're meant to act as equivalents to the peg holes for adjusting the belts. Obviously, the sizes are quite different, since this one was designed for little kids and this one was designed for adults. Getting around to the backs of the buckles, they basically have the same design but with some differences to account for the different ways they've been, well, basically for the different ways that they've incorporated the designs and switches into them. The back of the CSM down belt actually borrows a design element from the original Quick Selection down belt, which was moving the power switch and Imagine mode switch to the back side, and the Imagine mode switch was something that was first created for the original CS down belt. While on the original, the power switch is on the top. On the bottom, there's not too much different except for the inclusion of a BGM switch on the CSM version. Next we have the rider passes, which are pretty similar, but there are still noticeable differences. The first thing to notice is there is a little bit of a size difference to where the new CSM version is just a little bit bigger, but not by too much. The bigger difference obviously is something that I pointed out before, which is that the original had a rough texture, whereas the new one is completely smooth. The biggest difference, of course, being that the old version used clasps to hold it closed, whereas the new version just uses friction. That's because on the old version, the bomb part was very floppy and didn't have much friction, so they basically improved that by adding in friction so that it would hold its place or hold its position. They changed the inner design to be a little bit more screen accurate and a bit more metallic. And for the rider tickets, the original ones were made of cardboard, whereas the new ones are made of plastic, similar to the Kamen Rider cards from the CSM DK driver and DN driver. Though to be fair, even though this is 10 years old, this has held up quite well. There isn't too much damage to it, and the only bit of fraying is here at this corner. The interesting thing is that they are similarly sized, so you can actually put them into the opposite versions. It's just that for the old ones, they have a little bit of resistance when going into the new rider pass, whereas the new ones are actually ones that go in a little bit easier. So there might be a little bit of a size difference in terms of either the slots or the tickets themselves. Next thing to do is get to the electronic comparison. So we're going to unclip them, and switch them on, where we'll see the first difference. So the deluxe demo belt has a red light and makes that sound, whereas for the new CSM version, it uses a white light and has that sound. Then when we clip them in, no sound there, but for the new CSM belt, we get the sound that was originally the turn-on sound for the deluxe version. And that itself is already an improvement. Second thing is using the passes with them. So, if we simply scan it here, you get a red light and nothing else. But for the new version, we get the transformation sequence into Deno platform. Again, this was something that was originally on the CS version, as this does build off of the complete selection Deno belt, but I can't really compare that because I don't have that. Because the thing with that one is that at the time I couldn't afford it, and the thing is that because of the nature of it, it's actually something that for me became less affordable over time, as it became rarer. You can also see what happens when we do that again. You get the full charge from the deluxe, but then nothing from the CSM. That's because platform doesn't have a full charge. Now, what this basically chalks up to is how there are only 3 LEDs in the original, but a rainbow-colored LED or multicolored LED in the new one. So, next we'll get into the form transformations. First is sword form. We can see that the transition into the form change is not only something that is quicker, but it also has a more complex and more elongated transformation sound that is more accurate to the show, and not to mention that the light actually stays on for a little bit after the transformation is complete. Then we have the full charge. Now, for the original, you actually had to hold it there for about a second or two before it went off. But for the new version, it activates automatically. It also has an interesting feature where it actually separates these two sections into their own different light sections to where they actually alternate. And again, this is something taken from the Complete Selection version. Next we have rod form. Full charge. Max form. Another thing you'll notice between the comparisons is that the colors of light are different because of the way they use the different LEDs, or rather because of the different LEDs that they used. And next is gun form, which is where we actually see the biggest difference in terms of the way the lights work. Now, they might both seem like they're using purple LEDs, but if we take a closer look at the original, one thing that unfortunately doesn't come up quite well on camera is that for the original it actually had just 3 LEDs, which were red, blue, and yellow. So, for gun form, they got a purple light by actually just mixing together the red and blue LEDs, whereas on the new version it actually is a proper purple color. Now, just for a point of reference, though the old Complete Selection version did have this same kind of alternating pattern, it pretty much just had just slightly more expanded upon versions of the full charge sounds from the deluxe version. It had the same transformation sounds as well. It just more or less added in maybe a couple of explosions to the end, but, or rather, not even that, but just the additional charging sounds. So, this did add in even more than that. And finally, we got to the what happens when you remove the belt clips. If we untap this, we get nothing. But, for the new version, we get a transmission deactivation. Next we have the two versions of the K-Taros, and while from a distance they don't look too different, it's when we get up close that we can really see that they are actually pretty distinct. The first thing to look at is them in their closed modes. Now, there actually are some pretty subtle differences that are actually rather significant. The first one is up here, where it has the labeling of Deno System. For the original version, in order to see it, you had to hold it like this, upside down, or rather in a way that it was folded up and closed. But for the new version, it's actually flipped around. Not only is this more accurate, but it allows you to still see the labeling when you have it resting like that. You also see that they actually raised up this part and added in some indents all around the sides. There's also this metal pin that's stuck out right here that is no longer here, and instead they've added a slight button up here. Go around to the backs. You can see that for the part that clipped onto the belt, it's been changed from this rather protrusive clear plastic piece to this more subtle black extension. It is actually a little bit bigger, but at the same time doesn't stick out quite as much. Like with the Deno belt, they changed the position of the on and off switch from the back to being on the side. That makes it easier to access when it's attached to the belt. For the camera, they changed it from a sticker to actually being painted on. Next we open up and we can see a bit more difference. First up, for the top screen, we'll have generally the same design. What is more different is what happens when you look at them from the side. As you can see, this was pretty much just flat down, whereas this has more of a rounded ridge. And that connects to these parts here, where again that ridge is supposed to go into these divots. It's more significant on the new version, and again this is more accurate. Looking at the keypads, you can say that more detail was added to the center button, as well as painting in the icons on the sides. Though for the most part, the layouts of the actual keys is pretty much the same in terms of the design and the coloring. So, next we'll switch them on. And you also see that the button that has lights in it was unpainted on the original, whereas it's painted here on the new version. So, first thing to get to is the sound comparisons. And the first ones are the imagined voices. Now, for the original one, there were only phrases from K-Taros that were random, or rather were just random, regardless of what buttons you pressed, and so you could just press a button and hit the call button. Just get random phrases. But for the new version, they actually included phrases from all four main Imagine, depending on what color of button you pressed. Now the cool thing about this is that for the different rows, and before that we actually get into another one of the features, which was the random calls. Now for the original, after a set period of time, a ringtone will go off and you get a call, to which you can answer with the call button. For the new version, that switched to just pressing the call button once to get the ringtone. Then pressing again to answer. Now, as I was saying, with the new version, with the 3 rows that actually do basically when you use them in order, actually basically replicates three conversations or sets of phrases that were used in sequence within the show by the foreign Majin. Then the last of the features that are changed between them is the denliner summoning, or at least before we get to the transformation into Climax Form. So that was done by pressing the three colored buttons of one set, and then pressing the middle button. Now for the original, that was just different sequences of the generic denliner sound, but for the new version, they actually tailored them to each form. And lastly, we get to Climax Form. So, for both of the belts, you need to start by removing the covers to them to prepare them for the combination. Of note is that this was a feature that was actually left out of the complete selection version, as there was never a complete selection K-Taros. So for both of them, the sequence is done by hitting the four buttons at the bottom, hitting the call button, and then pressing the button on the side. That completely activates the transformation on its own. Then we set it onto the belt and clip it into the side to spring out the two horns. Though the connection is not that strong on the original. But then we get to the new version. Do that again. And this time, it actually transfers right into it. At this point, it pauses, so we need to attach it to the belt, which does have a tighter connection, but it's at the same time a little bit tougher to put on. Then, when we clip it to the side, actually hits a switch in here that not only, or rather hits two switches, one to spring out the horns, and one that completes the transformation. There are also comparisons to be made when, like this. Now, for the original version, the sounds didn't change in this when you had it attached to the belt. So it would still play random phrases. But for this one, it had new phrases that were activated when it was attached to the belt. And again, these were things that were basically things that served as sequences of sounds that were like conversations. And let's do that one more time because I cut that off. What also changes is what happens when you press the button again. For this one, it just plays the normal Climax Form transformation, including the form announcement. But for this one, instead, it just plays the transformation, the shortened version, without the name announcement. However, this doesn't happen when you don't have it plugged in. Instead, it just plays that sound. Now, obviously, this does have an imagine mode, which is activated by pressing and holding the button, and deactivated by pressing and holding again. No such feature is in the original. Then you get to the special attacks. So, first we have the full charge, which again is just a simple full charge that cycles through the different light colors, but obviously with the new version it is more complex. And this better shows off the variety of LED colors that it can make. Then we have the charge and up attack. And the thing there is, what this also kind of comes across, and one of the big things that you've probably been hearing throughout, is that one of the big differences between the two is the addition of layered audio in the new versions, to where the name announcement will play and the basically transformations or different sequences of sounds or sound effects will play alongside it, to have the sounds go along more smoothly. Instead of just saying the announcement then playing sound effects, they just transition into each other, and that's again something that is very much accurate to the series. Another thing that is new is that because of the way the belt is designed, plugging in the belt with the K-Taros attached for the CSM version gets you a transformation into Climax Form via the belt itself. And one last thing to show off is another smart feature add into the CSM version that makes it more accurate. If we unplug the belts, and try to do a transformation for the deluxe version, it'll go through same as always, but for the new version, pressing any of the buttons don't do anything. Neither does scanning the writer pass, meaning that it can only be done when the belt is plugged in. Again, these little bits of attention to detail really do make it stand out and really show how much it's improved. And there we go. Now obviously there are still a lot more differences between the two versions of the belt, but that's mostly stuff that was in, or that is in, the CSM version, that there isn't really anything to compare with in the original version because it didn't have some stuff like the Majin modes or some of the other features. And to be fair, the CSM demo belt is interesting because it is actually more meant to be an improvement on the Complete Selection demo belt rather than the deluxe, but this comparison still is apt because this was the original compared to the new definitive version. That being said, I don't think that the Complete Selection version is really worth getting anymore because, while it did add some things that we now see in the CSM version, it didn't really add quite as much, and there are still a lot of things about it that are flawed and not quite completely show accurate in terms of the lights and sounds. So, for the hardcore collector, the CSM version is the new definitive version. But for people who can't afford that, and just want a representation of the Den-O belt and K-Taros, what I actually recommend is not trying to go for the original ones, but actually instead trying to go for the super best Den-O belt, which was released a few years ago, not nearly as long ago as the original. It includes all the same stuff as well as some bonus rider tickets, as well as the Legend Rider series K-Taros, which again uses the same molding and same lights and sounds as the original one here, but it also adds some phrases to the other colored buttons of the three other Imagine. That was an element that was later put into and expanded with the CSM version. So, there you have it. It definitely is impressive to see just how far they've come along in 10 years since the originals. So, next time, I'll be reviewing the Trans-Steam Gun and Steam Blade Friday at 6 PM PST. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and if you're new and would like to see more, please subscribe. And for now, this is K-Taros 50, writing off.